We live in a world obsessed with putting numbers on what cannot be contained. Intelligence, an idea as fluid as water and as elusive as smoke, is constantly being squeezed into rigid metrics. The moment a society becomes fixated on quantifying minds, it begins to worship its own measurements rather than what they supposedly reveal. And that is precisely what has happened with the modern cult of IQ. Walk through any bookstore, scroll through any news feed, and you'll find the same ritual repeated. Rankings, charts, and sensational claims about collective intelligence rising, declining, or mutating. Intelligence becomes a scoreboard, and individuals become contestants. As if the richness of human thought could be reduced to a single number printed on a standardized test. This fetishism of measurement tells us less about intelligence and far more about our own insecurities. If we truly trusted our intellect, we would feel no urge to verify it on command. But because intelligence is invisible, immeasurable in its essence, we attempt to capture it through artificial proxies, logic puzzles, pattern sequences, memory tests, hoping the result will soothe a deeper uncertainty. Am I smart enough? And fueling this anxiety is a constant stream of dubious commentary. Articles proclaim that humanity has lost several IQ points in the last decade, or that children today are less intelligent than those of past generations. Commentators speculate about national declines in mental ability, as if intelligence were a commodity that could fluctuate like market stock. These predictions often rely on simplistic data, yet they spread because they flatter our cultural appetite for crisis and comparison. The absurdity reaches its peak when people retroactively assign IQ scores to historical figures. Leonardo da Vinci is awarded an imaginary 200. Mozart gets 165. Einstein hovers somewhere around 190, depending on the enthusiasm of the evaluator. Of course, none of these individuals ever took such a test, and their supposed scores reflect less their intellect and the desire of their admirers to mythologize them. We project numbers onto them because we cannot tolerate greatness that escapes our categories. What lies beneath all this is the illusion that intelligence is a stable object, something that can be captured, frozen, and ranked. But intelligence is not a fixed capacity. It is a shifting landscape shaped by culture, circumstance, and the problems society chooses to value. The tests we worship are merely mirrors reflecting our own definitions back at us. The real question is not, how intelligent are we? But why do we need intelligence to look measurable? Only when we confront this obsession can we hope to understand what intelligence truly is, not as a statistic, but as a living, evolving human power that cannot be contained by a number. We often speak of intelligence as if it were a timeless essence, a universal property that remains unchanged across eras and civilizations. Yet intelligence is one of the most context-dependent notions humanity has ever invented. What counts as smart in one period can look foolish, trivial, or even nonsensical in another. Our definitions shift not because the human mind evolves dramatically, but because societies change the kind of thinking they reward. A striking illustration of this relativity appears in the cult film Idiocracy. Its premise is intentionally absurd. A perfectly ordinary man, intellectually unremarkable by today's standards, wakes up centuries in the future only to discover that he is now the most intelligent person alive. The world he encounters is chaotic, dysfunctional, and hilariously inept. His mediocre reasoning suddenly places him at the summit of human intellect. Not because he's changed, but because the world around him has collapsed into absolute cognitive poverty. The brilliance of the storyline lies in its underlying message. Intelligence is not a universal threshold. It is a moving target dictated by the intellectual climate of society. Change the environment, change the expectations, and you inevitably change who appears intelligent. The genius of one age could be considered dangerously naive in another. The idiot of yesterday could become the visionary of tomorrow. Think of the skills we celebrate today: analytical thinking, digital literacy, abstract reasoning. These would have been meaningless in the Middle Ages. A medieval farmer, whose survival depended on knowledge of soil, weather, and seasonal cycles, might appear utterly unintelligent by modern criteria, yet he possessed a mastery essential for his world. Intelligence, then, is not a single continuum but a mosaic of cultural priorities. Even within our own era, the standard drifts. Some decades reward verbal eloquence. Others value mathematical creativity. Today we prize rapid information processing. But when the rules of the game change, the players change too. The mind that excels in one system may fail in another. Not because it is inferior, but because it is calibrated to different demands. This relativity becomes especially clear when we examine how societies judge intelligence through the lens of technology. A person adept at navigating digital interfaces, multitasking across screens, and consuming vast quantities of information is considered adapted, even bright. Yet this same pattern of behavior would have been considered frantic, scattered, and unfocused in an era that valued contemplative silence. What we praise today might be condemned tomorrow. The notion of intelligence as a stable construct collapses under this variability. Instead, intelligence appears more like a negotiation between individuals and their environments. It is not an internal treasure store within the mind, but a performance, an alignment between one's capacities and the expectations of a particular moment in history. What idiocracy exaggerates for comedic effect is what philosophy reveals with calm clarity. Intelligence is always judged in a framework, and that framework is never neutral. Every society decides what it wants to see, and then calls those who embody it intelligent. So perhaps the real question is not who is intelligent, but what kind of intelligence does our era choose to value? And more provocatively, what forms of intelligence are we currently ignoring simply because our society does not know how to recognize them? If we strip intelligence down to its most ancient roots, we discover that it was never meant to be a matter of test scores or abstract reasoning. Its original meaning, buried in the Latin word intelligere, reveals something far more grounded and far more demanding. Enter between intelligere, to choose. To be intelligent is not to accumulate knowledge, but to choose between things, to separate what matters from what merely distracts. Intelligence begins not in brilliance, but in discernment. This older meaning exposes a truth we often ignore. The mind is constantly flooded with impressions, information, stimuli, fragments of meaning. A person who cannot distinguish signal from noise, the relevant from the irrelevant, is not lacking knowledge. They are lacking orientation. They cannot navigate. They drift. Intelligence, in this foundational sense, is the capacity to sift through the world quickly and precisely, to identify the threads worth pulling. Take a simple example. Someone hears a made-up word, a jumble of syllables with no obvious meaning. Yet the mind instantly detects a familiar pattern inside it, isolates a recognizable fragment, and discards the rest as linguistic debris. This tiny act of mental triage happens effortlessly, but reveals the essence of intelligence, detecting structure amid chaos. From this act of discernment emerges a fascinating three-step movement, one that underlies all forms of higher thinking. Identify what is essential. The mind recognizes certain elements as meaningful, while others fall away into irrelevance. Connect the meaningful elements. Intelligence refuses to let isolated fragments remain isolated. It builds bridges, sees patterns, and forms constellations out of scattered points. Infer the underlying logic. Once the links are formed, intelligence seeks the principle that binds them together, the hidden coherence that makes the world intelligible. This progression operates in every domain of thought. Whether you are analyzing a political speech, reading a poem, or trying to understand a scientific paradox, the movement is the same: filter, connect, and illuminate. But this process is fragile. Modern information culture attacks the first step. It erodes our ability to distinguish the essential from the trivial. News feeds overflow. Stories multiply. Facts and pseudo-facts mix without hierarchy. When everything is presented as equally urgent, nothing can truly be grasped. Discernment collapses and intelligence, deprived of its foundation, becomes paralyzed. A mind that cannot select cannot think. This is why ancient philosophy treated discernment not as a technical skill, but as a moral one. To discern is to take responsibility for attention. It requires refusing the seductions of the irrelevant. It demands a disciplined question. What truly deserves to be understood here? Without this question, reasoning becomes mechanical, automatic, reactive, a mere imitation of intelligence. Seen in this light, intelligence is not the property of those who know the most, but of those who know what to ignore. It is not the mind that stores the largest archive, but the one that can strike through illusion and land quickly and precisely on what really matters. Before intelligence builds theories, before it imagines possibilities, before it reaches toward truth, it must first choose. And in that choice lies the quiet, invisible heart of what it means to be intelligent. Long before intelligence became a psychological variable or an exam result, it belonged to a very different world, a world shaped by myth, metaphysics, and cosmic order. To the ancient Greeks, intelligence was not something contained inside the skull. It was something that preceded us, exceeded us, and flowed to the entire universe. They called it the nous. The nous first appears in the writings of Anaxagoras, a philosopher who imagined the cosmos as a swirling chaos until a vast, rational force intervened. This force was not a god in the usual sense. It was more like a cosmic mind, a principle of order that set the world in motion and arranged everything according to an invisible logic. Intelligence, in this early vision, does not originate in human beings. Humans participate in it. They tune into it like a signal. This perspective feels almost alien today. We tend to imagine intelligence as an internal possession, a property of neurons, a personal resource we either have or lack. For the Greeks, the opposite was true. Intelligence was something outside us, something we approach with effort, discipline, and humility. A human being was intelligent not because they generated insight, but because they aligned themselves with a pre-existing structure of truth. Plato radicalized this idea. For him, the intellect is a bridge between the visible world and the invisible domain of forms, the eternal templates of beauty, justice, number, and order. To think is not merely to analyze, it is to ascend. Intelligence becomes a kind of spiritual motion, a turning of the soul away from shadows toward clarity. In his famous allegory of the cave, the intelligent person is the one who escapes the hypnosis of appearances and reorients their mind to a higher, more luminous reality. Knowledge is not invented but remembered. The soul already carries the imprint of truth, and intelligence is the act of rediscovering it. Aristotle, ever the pragmatist, reinterprets this cosmic heritage with more grounded psychology. He agrees that there is a universal nous, but he argues that humans express it in two modes, the passive intellect and the active intellect. The passive intellect receives impressions from the world, sounds, colors, shapes, sensations. It is the raw material of experience. The active intellect, by contrast, shapes these impressions, abstracts from them, and elevates them into concepts. It transforms the particular into the universal. A child learning to read illustrates this beautifully. At first, the marks on the page are meaningless shapes, but through the active intellect they become letters, and the letters become meaning. In this Aristotelian vision, intelligence is not a spark of genius, but a discipline of organization. It is a capacity to extract form from matter, coherence from multiplicity. Thinking is an art of sculpting. What is striking is how both Plato and Aristotle, despite their differences, imagine intelligence as a meeting point between the human and the universal. Intelligence is not entirely ours. It is a collaboration between our limited perspective and a structure of order that exceeds us. We contribute effort, attention, and reasoning. The universe contributes intelligibility. This ancient conception challenges our modern assumptions. It suggests that intelligence is not merely a mental capacity, but a relationship, a way of harmonizing ourselves with reality. It is not simply a matter of having a sharp mind. It is a matter of tuning the mind to the world's hidden architecture. Perhaps this is why the Greeks placed such value on philosophy. To think well was not only to solve problems, but to synchronize one's inner life with the order of the cosmos. Intelligence was a form of attunement. And maybe this is a question their legacy leaves us with. If intelligence is not just something we possess, but something we participate in, what does it mean to truly join that vast structure of meaning that the Greeks call the nous? When we speak of intelligence today, we usually imagine something clean and abstract, logic, rationality, calculation. The kind of intelligence that lives in quiet libraries and speaks the language of equations. But the ancient Greeks recognized another form, one that is far less noble, far less predictable, and far more deeply rooted in human survival. They called it Midas. If the nous is the serene intelligence of philosophers and mathematicians, Midas is the restless intelligence of strategists, wanderers, and tricksters. It does not seek eternal truths. It seeks the right move at the right moment. It bends reality instead of analyzing it. And if the noose aims for universal laws, Metis thrives on exceptions. No figure embodies Metis better than Odysseus. Unlike the heroes who triumph through brute strength, he succeeds through misdirection, improvisation, and an almost theatrical understanding of human psychology. When the monstrous Cyclops traps him in a cave, he does not overpower it. He deceives it, blinds it, renames himself nobody, and escapes by clinging to the bellies of the sheep. Every one of these moves is a small masterpiece of adaptive intelligence. Odysseus is not wise in the Platonic sense, but he is clever in a way that reveals another dimension of the mind, the intelligence that adjusts itself to chaos. Even Penelope, often overshadowed by her husband's adventures, becomes a symbol of Metis. Surrounded by men pressuring her to remarry, she devises a subtle form of resistance, weaving a shroud by day and secretly undoing it by night. Her intelligence is not theoretical, it is tactical. It is intelligence practiced in the shadows, intelligence made of patience, timing, and calculated ambiguity. What makes Metis so fascinating is that it contradicts everything we associate with proper thinking. It is not linear. It does not aim for clarity. It thrives on ambiguity, on reading situations, exploiting gaps, turning weaknesses into unexpected strengths. It is the intelligence of sailors who read the winds, of negotiators who sense shifts in tone, of inventors who notice tiny irregularities and transform them into breakthroughs. It is closer to intuition than deduction, closer to improvisation than method. But Metis is not opposed to rational intelligence. It complements it. The two form a kind of dialectical tension, one seeking structure, the other exploiting instability. And many of the greatest discoveries in human history come from this interplay. Consider the famous thought experiments of Galileo. When he lacked the instruments to test whether heavy and light objects fall at the same speed, he imagined a hypothetical scenario that would expose a contradiction in the old Aristotelian view. His reasoning was scientific, but the leap itself, the mental staging of an impossible experiment, was an act of Metis. It required cunning, not just logic. Einstein did the same centuries later, when he imagined chasing a beam of light. That vision did not emerge from pure deduction. It began as a playful, almost childlike scenario. A scientist running beside a ray of light is an image closer to myth than mathematics. And yet, from that imaginative leap emerged the foundations of relativity. Rational intelligence translated the consequences, but another kind of intelligence, fluid, daring, unrestrained, initiated the entire process. Literature offers its own perfect illustration in Edgar Allan Poe's A Purloined Letter. Police officers search a room with flawless thoroughness, dismantling furniture and examining every hidden corner. Their intelligence is methodical, impressive, and utterly useless. The detective Dupin, by contrast, solves a mystery by stepping into the mind of the culprit. He doesn't out-reason him, he outmaneuvers him. He imagines how a clever man might hide something, not in a secret compartment, but in plain sight, disguised by its very obviousness. Dupin's insight rests not on logic alone, but on psychological tact, imaginative reversal, and subtle intuition. These examples reveal an essential truth. Intelligence is not a single mode of thought. It is a choreography. One part analyzes, one part adapts, one part invents. The mind becomes intelligent not when it follows one path flawlessly, but when it can shift between paths, when it knows when to calculate and when to improvise. Perhaps the most sophisticated intelligence is the kind that refuses to be trapped in one form. The intelligence that can be philosopher and strategist, logician and trickster. The intelligence that sees the hidden structure in the world, but also the hidden opportunities in unpredictability. If intelligence were only a matter of logic or strategy, it would be easy to measure, categorize, compare. But what elevates human intelligence beyond calculation is something far more elusive, something no test can quantify and no algorithm can replicate. That force is imagination. Imagination is the point where intelligence breaks free from the boundaries laid out before it. It is the moment the mind refuses to accept the world as given and instead invents a world that could be. Rationality explores the known. Imagination explores the possible. And without that leap into the possible, intelligence becomes sterile. It solves only the problems that already have solutions. This capacity to imagine alternatives explains why the greatest advances in human thought often emerge from scenarios that never existed. Galileo's falling objects, Einstein chasing a beam of light, philosophers picturing cities of perfect justice or absolute corruption. These are exercises in imaginative displacement. They allow the mind to test ideas by creating entire mental universes. Imagination is not an escape from reality. It is a laboratory for understanding it. But imagination alone is not enough. There is another ingredient, quiet, sudden, and often misunderstood. Intuition. Intuition is not irrational. It is the echo of analysis that has sunk deep into subconscious. It is what appears after the mind has worked silently, connecting fragments without effort or awareness. A conclusion that arrives fully formed, without needing to announce its own process. We tend to romanticize intuition, but its true power lies in its discipline. It blossoms only when the groundwork, observation, reasoning, exploration, has already been laid. Intuition is intelligence completing its own process in the dark, then presenting the result in a flash of clarity. Poe's Detective Dupin does not guess. He perceives. Einstein does not dream randomly. He dreams within a framework built from years of focused thought. Intuition is not miracle. It is the mind finishing its work behind the curtain. Imagination and intuition together create what machines still cannot imitate, genuine conceptual leaps. Artificial intelligence can predict, combine, remix. It can navigate probabilities with astonishing precision, but it cannot invent the impossible. It cannot step outside the logic it was built upon. It cannot decide that the rules themselves are inadequate. Only a human mind can perform that rebellion. This is why intelligence, in its most authentic form, cannot be reduced to speed, memory, or efficiency. Those are mechanical virtues. Intelligence becomes truly human when it introduces novelty, when it generates an idea the world has never seen and could never have predicted. And this brings us to a startling contrast. The opposite of intelligence is not stupidity. It is instinct. Instinct is perfect repetition, flawless automaticity. It succeeds because it never questions itself. Birds migrate without hesitation. Spiders weave without instruction. Instinct is nature's certainty, its refusal to improvise. But intelligence is improvisation. It questions, hesitates, doubts, experiments. And while instinct is steady and comforting, it collapses when faced with the unfamiliar. Intelligence thrives precisely where instinct fails, in situations with no precedent. Yet society has a peculiar ability to suppress intelligence and awaken instinct. When environments demand mechanical repetition, humans begin to behave mechanically. Chaplin's iconic factory scene, tightening bolts long after leaving the assembly line, reveals how easily the mind can be trained out of thinking. When the world becomes a system of routines, intelligence becomes a burden and instinct takes over. This is the danger. Intelligence is not natural. It is an achievement. It must be protected, exercised, renewed. It weakens when confined, strengthens when challenged. It is not a built-in program but a fragile freedom. The freedom to question, to imagine, to refuse the obvious. If intelligence is the ability to solve new problems, then its true enemy is everything that prevents new problems from being seen. Conformity, repetition, distraction, fear. These are the forces that shrink the landscape of the mind. To preserve intelligence is not merely to sharpen logic. It is to keep alive the inner space where imagination can breathe and intuition can speak. Because intelligence, in the end, is not a number. It is a movement. The mind's continuous effort to escape its own limitations and create something that was not there before.